Okay, so that's backtracking from my previous Republic review, which was doing the Clone Wars stuff. But I finally got Outlander, which is the first arc of the Dark Horse's Star Wars comic, which became Republic post its initial miniseries Prelude to Rebellion. So I'll review that because, why not? But yeah, Outlander is the story that introduces starts to kind of. I think it's the story that starts the first story that we really get that explores our seeing a little bit. Obviously, she appeared in episode 1 beforehand. It does a little bit more with Ki-Adi after Prelude to Rebellion, which was obviously his origin story. Well, not origin story, but just about him. It also introduces A-Sharad Het and A-Sharad Het. And it's essentially a bunch of Tusken raids are happening on Tatooine, and smugglers are getting weapons from Jabba to fight back. And the Jedi find out that one of the Tuskens has a called the Outlander, or at least the Jabba was called the Outlander, has a lightsaber, and that it is Ithkath's old apprentice Sharad Het, who was thought to be dead or just disappeared off the map. And they go and they send Ki-Adi off to find him because he's the only one of the council who didn't have a personal relationship with him. And so yeah, he goes to Tatooine, and at the same time, Aurra Singh is trying to kill Sharad Het for Gardola, while Jabba is still provoking the Sand People so that they'll attack, and so that he can then overprice weapons to the settlers. So essentially, he's manipulating two innocent factions into killing each other in classic Jabba being a dickhead fashion. But yeah, so it's really interesting seeing because this takes place really soon after episode 1, like a few months, and it's really interesting to see how Tatooine is right afterwards, and kind of Aurra Singh's still on Tatooine after the Boonta Eve pod race, and we have Gardola, who obviously showed up in the movie. It's really nice to have it be dealing with a consequence. The reason they're going after A-Sharad, or they're going after Sharad, is that they need every Jedi they can get, and he was a great warrior. So the chance that he's still alive, they need to get him to work with them. So yeah, Ki-Adi meets up with him, and they kind of find out about Jabba's manipulating everyone into fighting each other. And he's saying, oh no, I'm trying. The Tuskens would kill everyone. I'm trying to get them to just kill the smugglers or arms dealers and stuff like that. But then accidentally they're killing some moisture farmers and stuff like that. And he's like, oh well, they would have killed us otherwise. And it's you can tell he's just trying to justify it to himself because they're accidentally killing civilians as well. It's really interesting to see how, even though he doesn't, Ki-Adi says he doesn't sense any darkness in him, he's still, there's still definitely some attempts to justify, horrible actions and stuff like that, and trying to almost become a warlord in a way, and the Jedi need everyone they can get, and obviously they can't do this. He's not acting like a Jedi at all, and it's really interesting to see because it's not an easy situation at all, because the moisture farmers are Jabba is attacking them, but nevertheless, you don't take it out on the moisture farmers. They're the ones who are being manipulated as well, and sure, they're killing people, but they're being forced to kill people based because he's not making sure the Sand People are not playing as dirty, or they're getting murderous retribution instead of trying to go to instead of just saying to some of the moisture farmers, no, I swear this is Jabba's manipulation. I mean, they might not believe them, but instead of trying to be diplomatic, he's caring more about the Sand People culture of being warriors than being a Jedi, and being a Jedi would probably make this a lot easier. And he says he's still a Jedi, but clearly he's letting the war culture of the Sand People take over. He kind of tries to find a balance, but the thing is, there really is none. He points out at one point that, sometimes peace can only be obtained with a lightsaber, but as Mundi says, you're going beyond that by flat out, making attacks like this. Yes, just as you know that the day we joined the Order, we pledged to use our powers to defend and protect, not to attack, to serve others, not to rule them. You've made yourself chief of the Tuscans, and carry on a war on the off-world settlers of Tatooine. How do you do these things and remain a Jedi? And he's like, oh well, they killed some of our people, and Jabba's provoking them. It's like, yeah, but you're still you're still making attacks. You're being provoked by somebody else and then killing the middleman. And yeah, that's kind of what Key's trying to point out to him. And unfortunately, as he starts to realize, just how screwed all of them are, and how they're kind of just he's also playing the Jabba's hands as well, and starting to lose it. They get attacked by a bunch of forces by Darth Abdullah the Hutt, and A-Sharad actually. Well, because earlier we had met A-Sharad, Sharad's son, and Padawan. No, he says this is Padawan, which it's weird that if he hasn't left Tatooine in 15 years, how he somehow was able to get A-Sharad a lightsaber, because he says that A-Sharad built a lightsaber, but I don't know how you get a Deegan crystals or Kyber crystals on freaking Tatooine. That's a little suspicious. Still, I really like, a Jedi just trying to protect a single planet and sort of becoming a warlord. And again, it's fascinating to see just this, character doesn't really, I don't think it's a single line in English, or in Basic until the final issue, become, one day Darth freaking Great. It's kind of hilarious just to see how he began as just a background character in one story, obviously with an intent to set up, use him again, but nevertheless, by the end he becomes Ki-Adi's apprentice, and it's like, oh yeah, there's so much great potential for him, but also a lot of darkness. It's like, oh, you don't even know the half of it. And, but yeah, this arc, the initial arc, is written by, I think the same guy who did Prelude to Rebellion. It's Tim Truman, drawn by Tom Rainey, Ron Pariah, Rick Leonardi, and Al Rio. And the arts are fantastic in this book. Some of the covers are, some of them are fantastic. Some of them look a little, the first one looks a little too realistic. Well, they're all by the same guy, but some of them look a little too realistic. I think, or just too weird for doesn't look as cartoony as the books inside, which it's so brutal because it's Tatooine, and a lot of people using slug throwers and stuff. There's kind of a grittiness to it, while at the same time doing the very it's a perfect balance between the original trilogy, TOTJ, and the prequels, which is why a lot of people really love these early stories for the Republic comic. And also, it's just great seeing Jedi being Jedi. And of course, it's interesting to see how Jedi are supposed to conduct themselves, and the debate about when they should attack, how does a Jedi handle oneself when, but on their own when they're not really part of the Order, and kind of the, honor of, are you still a Jedi if you start to do that stuff? Can you really be both a Tusken and a Jedi? Are you still a Jedi if you portray, that code and everything? And it's a little too easy to have it be like, oh, no, I sense, they're still good in you, so you're fine, you're good to go, no redemption. I'm not saying we shouldn't necessarily redeem Shirai, because he wasn't doing anything absolutely dark side-esque, but I do wish there was a little, I do wish, Ki was a little bit more aggressive towards it. He's kind of just like, oh, Jabba's manipulating this stuff. Okay, never mind, it was okay that you still perpetuated the fighting. He just kind of drops it after a while because they get attacked, and I kind of wish he was a little bit more peeved about that, which kind of was my problem with, I like Ki-Adi-Mundi a lot. He'd be perfect for the TOTJ era. For the prequel era, there's a little bit of some I just have some problems with him as a character, with the fact that they were still figuring out, I think, or at least when Prelude to Rebellion came out, they still didn't fully understand what the prequel Jedi were going to be like, because they hadn't watched the movie yet, because it was still in the works. And they kind of just function the same way they do in TOTJ, where they're allowed to have families, they're allowed to have they're allowed to have personal relationships, And some of that stuff in the prequel era is still kind of there, where like it's a little rarer. And with, of course, in Ki-Adi's case, it's retroactively kind of like, oh, well, it's because Surians have such a small male population that he's allowed to have families, families he's allowed to live on Surya. But it's still strange how, like, just not normal Jedi is when he's supposed to be kind of the classic, like, Jedi of this era that we're trying to be introduced to, when he doesn't really hold himself like one. Like, he brings up, oh, the Jedi can't be like this, but he also doesn't seem to have any of that dogmatism, which might seem like it makes him a great character, but the problem is, again, I wish they brought it up as, oh, it's a difference, but it feels more like they just are confused as to what they want to do with the character in contrast to the Jedi overall, because, again, like, they bring up some of, like, the dogmatic stuff, or, like, the Jedi having a very strict code, and at this era, like, the risk of having emotions and stuff, but they don't really go anywhere beyond that. It's just like, oh no, you're trying to get retribution and unprovoked attacks. Oh, that's kind of bad. That's not how the Jedi should function. The end. That's just the end of the debate. It's like that. I don't know. It's like it starts debate, but doesn't really finish it. Like, I almost feel like it would have been more interesting potentially if we had a Jedi who was a little bit more, who was just as understanding as Ki, but was a little bit more pushy for it. Like against what A-Sharad was doing. Somebody like Plo Koon would have definitely. Or Shakti would have operated in that situation. Like, understanding, yeah, you have a reason for why you're doing this, but not just being like, oh, well, as long as you're not doing it for dark side reasons, then it's fine. I just feel like it's way too rushed in the final two issues. Or final issue. Yeah, no, it's the last two issues. But yeah, I like Ki-Adi-Mundi. He's really like action hero-y. Again, he feels like straight out of TOTJ, which of course was the previous, like, big Dark Horse thing at the time. And, yeah, like, it's nice to see some references to stuff. Like, they reference Qui-Gon having died, and that's one of the things that starts to make A-Sharad contemplate coming back to the temple, and, mention that the Sith are back, and, mention of the fact that there was a, kid on Tatooine who has now been, put in the Jedi Order. Though still, like, they have some... But, like, it's weird that, they still haven't fully understood, I think, the point of the Jedi in this era, where, like, they're still a little too lenient than the Jedi that are supposed to be for this time, because, like, apparently A-Sharad says that many Jedi return to the service of the planet of their birth, which is just abnormal in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, I like the idea of the Jedi being, a little bit more... Well, I don't know, letting the Jedi come back to the planet of their birth is a little weird, because, higher emotions there, they're not going to be able to, control themselves as well, they're not going to be, as diplomatic if, like they might have a little too much loyalty to a family house. I mean, we've seen that happen before. Like, the problem is they're still trying to make the Jedi are a little too, perfect at this point. Like, what I liked in TOTJ was, you saw, like, the Jedi being a lot more lenient, and while they didn't, by the end, get to a point of, like, oh shit, we shouldn't have done this stuff, you could see the seeds of maybe letting them have, as an interpersonal relationship isn't as good, maybe letting them be as close to their masters as they are isn't as good. Like, you see in TOTJ, pretty much everyone, other than Kay, and that one Twi'lek and Nami, are susceptible to a lot of the problems that, are brought up in the prequel trilogy as, things the Jedi can't do. Like, the Jedi might be a little too controlling about that stuff, but at the same time, like, again, you got people like Shakti and Plo Koon and Obi-Wan who are emotionally, secure enough to handle going back, or Mace Windu when he goes back to, Mace freaking Windu when he goes back to the planet of his birth, it's a big thing, and there's a lot of, like, contemplation about it, and kind of, like, he does struggle emotionally with it, and that's Mace Windu. Like, it's a little weird to have, Ki-Adi live on the planet of his birth. Like, there's specific circumstances for that. My only problem is, I wish there was a little bit more of an emphasis on the fact that I mean, this is more of a problem with Prelude to Rebellion that I have, with the fact that Ki-Adi is completely biased to what he prefers, what he thinks his world should be like, because he grew up there, because the Jedi allowed him to live there constantly. And it's like, that's problematic again with the Jedi of this time. Like, they were still trying to work it out a little bit, but it's like, by 2001, this was, actually, no, wait, this was 99, I think, hold on. Yeah, this was 99, but still, by the year Episode 1 came out, they should have, probably have watched the film a couple of times and read the script probably ahead of time as well. Like, it's kind of weird that the Jedi clearly, like, the Jedi were against training Anakin because he knew his mom. Like, why would they even let a Jedi go back? Like, why would you have a statement about the Jedi constantly letting them go back to their birth words? Like, in Key's case, okay, it's acceptable because it's a very specific circumstance. The problem is just, as we see right here, if you let a Jedi become so personally connected to the people he's protecting, even if he's not even from there, he starts to become biased, and innocent people pay the price. And it's never brought up when this could be a very strong debate for how much the Jedi should be allowed to have personal lives. And it's never completed because we want to make the Jedi perfect, even though that's not what the prequel era is supposed to be about. And it's so interesting. It's not really that hampers, I think. If it does hamper the book, it's in an interesting way at the very least. Or at the most, it just makes it more interesting. And I do feel like, obviously, I think that I do kind of have some problems with, again, just how they don't really talk too much about, like, the possible flaws of the Jedi Order. Well, actually, they're ignoring stuff that I think, rules that the Jedi Order has that I think are actually important, like, again, not letting them constantly go back to their home planets ever and protect them because their emotions are too high and stuff. Like, Jedi are supposed to be tempered, but A-Sharad proves perfectly that you can't always temper yourself when put in a situation that's like this by being too emotionally connected to a specific group. And that's exactly something that should have been debated and should have been conversed on, but it isn't. It's just brought up once, and then never really again. Like, we don't deal with the Jedi philosophy at all, and that's really, really saddening because you have such a potential. I mean, especially because I just read Yoda Dark Rendezvous, which came out, I think, like, that would have been about 4 to 5 years after this did, and that deals with this very thing of Jedi connections to their families and stuff like that, and going back to their homeworlds, and they talk about how dangerous and dark that is, and how well, even if a Jedi isn't falling to the dark side because they're getting too emotional, like again, the Jedi are all about temperament, and they get why emotions for that are good, but they have to be an effective Jedi, and especially a master, you have to temper, you have to be in control at all times. And so it's kind of annoying to have it be like, oh, well, as long as you're not using the dark side, it's okay that you're completely biased and not being diplomatic at all and not searching for the peaceful solution in every situation. It's like, that's not the Jedi. It's almost too clean cut, like, oh, well, if the person's not evil, then it's okay, which isn't at all how I'd expect a Jedi Council member to act. Like, I wouldn't expect the Jedi Council to be like, oh, you must be, you're a monster for this. But they'd still, again, if, like, Obi-Wan or Plo or Mace or even some of the more level-headed, a lot of the more level-headed Jedi would still take umbrage at this because, it's still not Jedi-like. Like, they don't begrudge others for not following their specific morality, but when somebody says, I'm a Jedi because the bad things I'm doing aren't dark side-esque, isn't really gonna be justifiable in the minds of a Jedi. And the problem is, again, because the Jedi are supposed to be the heroes, oh well, this guy identifies as a Jedi, and Ki identifies as a Jedi, so then they must, not, have conflicts. It's like, it just gets rid of a moral conflict simply because, oh, well, they both are good guys, therefore, their different moral viewpoints just disappear. It's like, that... I feel like that's really weak. And again, they were still trying to work on how the Jedi operate in this era, but, like, again, I really like how the Jedi Order was in TOTJ and in the New Jedi Order era at this time, but those Jedi Orders had, like with Luke's Jedi Order, it was very specific, and they still very much were taught to temper more, and they wouldn't have let something like Sharad, happen, and Luke would have, handled that a little bit better. It wouldn't have been as lenient. And I get that he had to, couldn't continue the debate because there was, an immediate attack, but still. And then, of course, you also have stuff like with TOTJ, you see why, they don't, you see why that sometimes is a problem. Like, sometimes it can be good, Kay and, Ulick's love for his brother is what brings him back, but at the same time, he falls in the first place because he's too close to his master, Arthur Jeff. Like, there's a clear, it's a hard decision, but here it's kind of like, oh, well, we're supposed to like the Jedi, so any of the tough questions that, need to be asked, oh, well, we just do what, it's just kind of simplified to, oh, no, it's okay because we don't want them to be questionable. I don't know, it's a little too clean cut by the end of just okay, now A-Sharad can be welcomed into the Order because, well, Anakin was welcomed as well. It's like, yeah, because he might be the chosen one. This kid is a freaking warlord, and he's just welcomed into the Order even though he uses the Force as a, purely offensive tactic. I get trying to help him, but it's a little quick. Just in the context of the story itself, obviously I know stuff with A-Sharad later is fantastic, and as a Jedi he was great, and he tempered himself constantly. But still, I feel like there's a lot of flaws with just how the Jedi function at this point, and how... And I'd love to see somebody, trying to debate this, because I'm fascinated by it, but at the same time, I think that's just because I know stuff. I think about the stuff all the time the story was written. A lot of that stuff isn't written yet, and the problem is it's not. And my problem is more it's not trying to discuss that stuff. There wasn't much of a description as to what well, it was though. That's the problem. It was. We had episode 1, and we had the Jedi talking about how they don't have families and they don't have they're constantly tempering themselves. And then A-Sharad, simply because he's not using the dark side, oh, well, it's okay then that you don't temper yourself at all, and that you temper yourself by not murdering people outright, so the fact that you use the Force essentially for offensive purposes is perfectly okay. I don't know, it's like the Jedi wouldn't do this, again... It's at a point where the Jedi are almost too lenient. It wants to be TOTJ, but this era isn't TOTJ, and even TOTJ raised those questions. It talked about how, Ulick was trained kind of poorly, and how the system they had at that time was kind of dangerous, and that it might need to be fixed. And so you have a story set centuries later. Why would you have, in an era where we know that the Jedi improved upon the flaws of the flaws that the TOTJ Jedi had in some ways. Obviously, somewhat they went too far. But still, it's just weird to have the Jedi change just to make them seem a little bit more basically likable. Even though I'd say the Jedi are still likable, even with the, it doesn't necessarily make the Jedi unlikable to have them tell their people not to freaking go back to their homeworld. That makes sense. But still, it's kind of here the Jedi are oh, well, no, we're just doing this more because we need troops and not because one of our own is currently potentially becoming a warlord, and, oh, it's okay that you're a warlord because you're not using the dark side, so it's okay. It's he's still using the Force purely for offensive purposes and stuff like that, and, even if he's not fallen to the dark side, that doesn't become a Jedi. Just because you're using the Force and are not a darksider doesn't make you a Jedi. He says, oh, I'm still a Jedi because you don't see any darkness in my heart. That doesn't make one a Jedi. There's more to it than that, but the problem is, it's the way I feel like the writer just oversimplifies what it means to be Jedi way too much. And again, I really like this book, but that is really problematic throughout. I mean, hell, Aurora Singh is kind of the perfect example of why what they're doing is wrong. You're by having people who have the potential of so easily becoming over emotional. That's a bad thing. You shouldn't do that, or you should teach them to temper themselves a little bit more. And usually that doesn't work if you are too lenient. And the problem is that you're putting A-Sharad in. A-Sharad had to go through a lot of struggling with his inner demons before he became very serene. He was nothing like. He wasn't much like his father as here when he became a Jedi. Obviously he was later when he became a warlord. or post-Order 66, but still, like, during the Clone Wars, he was very much a Jedi, in the way that, like, Obi-Wan was a Jedi. He was very, to the point of, pissing Anakin off. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just I don't like the characterization for Ki-Adi too much here. Like, I like the idea of having a Jedi who he's allowed to have a family, because of, specific circumstantial reasons, and he's allowed to be on his homeworld a lot, and the inherent thing of, he's biased towards his homeworld, he's, like, in Prelude to Rebellion, like, you can tell there's a clear bias towards what he thinks his homeworld should be, and that's not necessarily right for a Jedi, but they don't talk about the fact that that's not necessarily right for a Jedi. They don't debate the topic. It's just like, they want Ki-Adi-Mundi to be more relatable, and so they give him traits that shouldn't be, there for a Jedi, or if they are, should be explored for the fact that they make him different. But they don't, simply because they don't want to make it overcomplicated there, and it's like there's a really great story waiting to be told there, and they keep skipping it, just because, they don't want to, they don't want to deal with the fact that their protagonist, they accidentally gave a backstory that potentially spits in the face of what the Jedi were supposed to be in this era. And the problem is, it's clinging too much to the Jedi of the New Jedi Order and TOTJ, when again, by this point, we had had an example of what the Jedi were in this era. And they were a lot more of a centralized organization, but the Jedi functioned too much like they do in the Old Republic era, which, again, I love the way the Jedi function in TOTJ, but that's because it's different. Here, they're sticking to things the way they were, previously, in an era where that's not the point. He shouldn't function like, Ulick or Nami's husband did and stuff like that. Like, he shouldn't be able to be like that. Or if you're going to do that, draw more attention to the fact that that is a massive risk, rather than, oh yeah, that's just uncommon. Like, it's not just uncommon, it's something that would be kind of scary, because a lot of Jedi have fallen for because of the very same exceptions that they're making with Ki. And I'd like to see, not to knock against Ki, because that'd be interesting to see how Ki is strong enough to overcome that stuff. The problem is, you need to show that is something many people would succumb to in the first place, and then show him overcome that before you can just be like, oh no, it's all good. It's like, no, you can't just act like, well, he's heroic, or A-Sharad isn't evil because Ki senses that, so therefore it's okay that he's a warlord. Like, the problem is they don't have a defined version of what a Jedi is. I don't know, even in TOTJ, like, with the Jedi were a lot more lenient and weren't as much of a centralized order, if a Jedi started acting like a warlord, they would be kicked out. They were still very much monks who would take up arms when necessary. And the problem is, they bring it up once and then kind of just ignore it. And that does really, really bother me. But the overall, seriously, great book. I definitely recommend it. I like a lot of the stuff with Gargola and Java. The climax is really weak, I'd say. The final, 2 issues are not perfect. Artist seems pretty interesting. It's great to see A-Sharad in action early on. I think, though, again, a lot of the stories that kind of deal with these characters later fix a lot of the flaws. And, again, once Ostrander's brought in, he really starts to make, Ostrander, early in his run, starts bringing these debates, specifically about A-Sharad and being a warlord, and how a Jedi should function, and, like, it's an actual debate there, while here it's kind of just like, oh, well, Ki-Adi-Mundi seems more sympathetic and likable if he's allowed to have a family, or if he is a lot more, and if he's, not as angry at A-Sharad or doesn't come off as indoctrinated. But the problem is, that's how he's going to function. The prequel Jedi do function a certain way, they have a specific morality. You can't just play fast and loose with that morality just because that's not how you want to write your protagonist. And sure, they have a very specific reason for that, but then discuss more why he's so different, because there's a reason for it, but then have people bring up the fact that most Jedi aren't like that. The problem is the only Jedi you're being introduced to so far are people who break the rule of how the prequel era Jedi are, but you can't break the status quo before you've established what the status quo is. Like, maybe it would have been best to showcase how Eth Koth was more in action in this, or show a little bit more of how Plo Koon was and stuff like that, rather than, like, Ki-Adi-Mundi comes off very wise and everything, but, nevertheless, he's still like again, he's a wise, brilliant, Jedi, but again, still has biases, about his homeworld and the fact that he has a family, the fact that he has, he did spend a lot of time, he spent a lot of time on his homeworld and has a lot of, specific beliefs and connections and ideals and political stuff that would kind of hinder your ability to be objective as a Jedi, and they don't really talk about that. And you're here, like, with A-Sharad Head, it's like, oh, well, as long as you're not using the dark side, well, then it's okay that you're not functioning like a Jedi at all, because you're still a Jedi as long as you have a lightsaber, I guess. It's like, the problem is, it's kind of like they want to have a story with a bunch of Jedi, but don't really want to actually define what the Jedi are and explore the nature of that order, and what, like the Jedi's rules and everything, because there are rules to being a Jedi. It's too fast and loose. Like, I feel like it's almost like somebody who was reading, Tom's, run on TOTJ and didn't fully get how those Jedi function. Like, thought, like, oh, well, they're a lot more on their own, kind of like lone samurai kind of guys, so I can do that too, when that's not really how those Jedi necessarily are. They still are a lot more tempered and controlled and have a lot more roles than Mundi seems to here. More, a lot of more like a specific philosophy than we see with Sharad, where it's kind of like, they play a little just too fast and loose with how a Jedi functions for the sake of the story, and that's problematic, because in the grand scheme, you're just kind of hurting yourself with defining an era by misinterpreting how the Jedi function isn't really going to do anyone any favors. I mean, yeah, but like still, definitely check it out. It's still a good read, and Sharad's a really fascinating character, but again, it brings up a debate and never really finishes, or it never really discusses it in depth, and just kind of, again, I don't think the writer gets at all what the Jedi are. Kind of just sees them as, oh, cool, they're samurai dudes. Doesn't really get that the Jedi aren't just wise samurai who believe in the Force. There's more to it than that. There's a more specific philosophical and political kind of belief and approach to that again, like a lot of the Dark Wars stuff already had shown, and I don't really get how you could, make a leap to how Ki-Adi-Mundi is a character from how those other characters were written. I don't know how you could get from Outlander to how the Jedi seem to how the Jedi seem to be so fast and loose here, when there were clearly rules with people like, I'm forgetting his name, the Exarch Master. Like, a lot of the Jedi in TOTJ still had rules. There was still a very much, very specific, like, rules. It was just, they were a little too fast and loose, they played it somewhat too loose. They were a little too disconnected from each other. There was too many apprentices under one master, and so they fixed that. But here, they almost descend more into being even looser than they were as an order in TOTJ. But yeah, it's still like a really, really good book. It's really fun to see, again, a Jedi in his, Jedi just doing Jedi things, even if I feel like they don't get at all what the Jedi actually, how the Jedi function precisely. Like, it's more just, they're elite they're elite, like, samurai dudes, rather than monks who also fight. Like I feel like it kind of misses, like, it makes a big leap for what, between what the Jedi are supposed to be, but still, it's definitely a good read. I definitely recommend it, especially for the stuff with A-Sharad, and especially for Aura Singh. But yeah, so I've ranted a little too long on that, but yeah, it really is a good book overall, and it's a fun read if nothing else.